Hello, newscasters. It is Saturday afternoon and I'm recording our conversation at about 4:30 in what has been a very, very fast-paced news moment as the war in the Middle East passes the fortnight mark. There are three stars of the show this afternoon. First of all, you with your questions and messages about the ongoing conflict in Iran. Second of all, we're going to talk to the BBC's Frank Gardner, who's reporting for us from Riyadh in Saudi Arabia. He'll bring us the very latest on what's been happening in the conflict. And the BBC's Steve Rosenberg will join us too from Moscow after Donald Trump controversially relaxed some of the restrictions on Russia selling its oil. So plenty to come. But your questions are at the top of our list. We had a message from Sue, clever Sue in Cardiff, back on the 10th of March. And she wrote, Putin has congratulated the new supreme leader. He's helping Iran with defence information, yet Trump may lift oil sanctions on Russia. And this week, Sue's prediction came true. America did loosen sanctions on other countries buying Russian oil. So Sue, well done. It might not make you feel good, but you were right. So we'll find out today how important that move was from Donald Trump's ever controversial White House. And we'll hear from Riyadh in Saudi Arabia about the very latest events in the war. Hello, it's Laura in the studio. And we are now 2 weeks into a new war in the Middle East. And we promised to you on Newscast that we will keep you up to date every day on all the things that are happening in that conflict, which has spread right across that region. And today we're joined by Frank Gardner, our security correspondent, who's in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia, one of the countries that has come under attack. Hello, Frank.
Hello, Laura. Hello.
Now, where you are right now, it's Iftar, which is the break of Ramadan. So before we get into the details of what's happened in the conflict, just what's it like where you are right now? What's the atmosphere?
I'm going to be really honest with you. Here in Riyadh, you wouldn't know there is a war on. I'd love to tell you that I'm ducking into bunkers, but it really isn't true. This is because it's quite a long way from the actual coast of the Gulf, which has been taking a lot of the hits. So Bahrain, Qatar, Kuwait, UAE, Dubai, etc. They've all taken a real pummeling, particularly on their economic facilities. But Riyadh being the capital here, the Saudis are trying very hard to stay out of this. But they're not immune from it, as you rightly say. I mean, yesterday, I think they intercepted about 18 incoming projectiles. Most of these have been aimed at the east of the country, at the oil-producing part of the country. And I spent part of yesterday visiting a British Army Royal Artillery Air Defence unit out in the desert, whose job it is to help protect some of the critical national infrastructure here in Saudi Arabia. Things I think people accept could probably get a whole lot worse. They don't want it to. They want this war to end, and they are, in varying degrees of annoyance, they are furious with Iran, America, and Israel.
But there is no sign of things calming down or de-escalating. And in the last 24 hours, both Iran and the US have been hitting key oil facilities in the Middle East. And there was an intercepted drone strike hitting one of the Middle East's largest oil storage facilities, with, of course, all the consequences that there are from that. What happened there?
So that's in a place called Fujairah. So everyone's heard of Dubai, everyone's heard of Abu Dhabi, but they are only 2 out of 7 emirates in what makes up the United Arab Emirates. The only one that's got a port outside the Gulf, on in the Gulf of Oman, on the Arabian Sea, is Fujairah. And that was hit today by falling debris from an intercepted drone. And that's a worry, because people on that side of the country thought they might well get through this without necessarily being hit. But that isn't the case. Even Oman, which argued really vociferously against this war, Oman has been hit, even quite far down south. And that's extraordinary, because Oman has gone to great lengths to not just stay neutral. They've stayed on good terms with Iran. And the foreign minister flew to Washington, to D.C., right on the eve of all of this to try and persuade the Americans not to do it. And yet they've been hit too. So this war has spread very quickly from being military targets, US bases in the region, which Iran always said it would threaten to attack if it was attacked, to diplomatic and economic targets and civil targets, civilian targets.
And I just wonder, you know that region very well, but I feel like we're all getting to know the map, which maybe was a bit of a mystery to many of us thousands of miles away. But with all your experience of covering that region, Frank, are you surprised by the way in which Iran has expanded its attacks beyond, as you say, what they'd always said. If you hit us, we'll hit American bases in the region. Are you surprised at how they've retaliated?
Yes, I am, Laura, definitely. I mean, this is my third Gulf War. The first one being 1991, Desert Storm. Second one being 2003, the US-led invasion of Iraq, and now this one. And I think that there are going to be some really big long-term changes, some kind of seismic shifts, because for most of these countries, there is no substitute to the United States as their big strategic partner and ally and provider of arms. But the problem for people in this region is that the United States has a very close relationship with Israel, of a strategic partnership, and they see that, many people here see that as a liability. Governments in this part of the world are often closer to Israel in some cases than they are to their own people. So, for example, under the Abraham Accords, you've got Bahrain and the UAE they've got full diplomatic and trade relations with Israel. They use a lot of Israeli tech. There are Israeli tourists in Dubai, but most people on the ground don't like Israel. They're very angry with what's happened to Gaza. They're not happy with what's happening in the West Bank. And that is a liability for governments here. So there's no easy way out of this for the governments. They just want this to stop. And they've come to live with their great big neighbor, the Islamic Republic of Iran, just across the waters. They don't like the revolutionary nature of the Islamic Republic. They don't like the fact that Iran sponsors these proxy militias around the region, which governments here see as being very disruptive. Things like Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, Hamas in Gaza, and a whole host of proxies in Iraq. These are all, in the eyes of governments here, troublemaking militias. But nevertheless, they would still rather have an uneasy peace with Iran than what's going on now, because it's hurting their economies and it's hurting their tourist industries.
And it really is potentially hurting absolutely everywhere if the oil price stays as sky high, if this conflict runs on for a long time. And the latest American strikes on the other side, which America said it's, and I'm quoting, totally obliterated targets on Karg Island, which houses Iran's major oil terminal. I mean, do we know the extent of those attacks, Frank, and what the implications of them might be if it's out of operation?
Well, it's not out of operation. What they've done, what the Americans have done, is to go after the military targets. So the bases that guard Karg Island. Karg Island is important because it's the export terminal for 90% of Iran's oil. That's the lifeblood of the Iranian economy. Why does it have to come out through an island? Because the Gulf is quite shallow, and big tankers, ocean-going tankers, one's called VLCCs, that's very large crude carriers, they can't get close enough into the coast to take on board hundreds of thousands of barrels of oil. So instead, they load it at Karg Island. Now, I'm old enough to remember that from the Iran-Iraq tanker war of the 1980s. The Iraqi Air Force was constantly bombing that Karg Island terminal, trying to put it out of action. What the Americans have done is to attack the military targets on Karg, but they say they've left untouched for now the oil facilities. Iran has said, well, if you do that, if you hit our oil facilities, we will turn to dust all sorts of US economic targets in the region. And at the same time, Donald Trump is saying, well, if you don't unblock the Strait of Hormuz, we will do this and that. There's a lot of kind of chest thumping going on here. You're going to have to forgive the bit of noise in the background. It's iftar time, which is after the end of the day, the breaking of the fast, as you probably know. Yeah, it's Ramadan. Well, it's Ramadan everywhere, but particularly in Saudi Arabia.
It's nice to hear the sounds of normal life and people sounding like they might be managing to be cheerful at a time of great turmoil for their region. Just though, in all your experience of covering conflicts in that part of the world, seeing what we're all seeing now, Frank, do you have any sense that this might be in any way, shape or form close to an end? Because here in the UK, government ministers are pretty petrified by how long this might go on for, with all the implications for the economy. Do you have any sense that it might be close to winding down?
Well, I interviewed one of them yesterday, Yvette Cooper, our foreign secretary. She was, we followed her around in the desert as she visited this Royal Artillery unit that's doing air defense here. And I kind of put the same thing to her, actually. She was a bit equivocal about it, but the sense I got from her was that she was not nearly as optimistic as she was a week ago. as to when this is going to end. I think the key here, look, the Israelis are going to carry on until they run out of ammunition, frankly. Iran is playing the long game. They've been battered militarily. They know that they can't possibly match the might of the US military. The key in all of this is that sooner or later, Donald Trump is going to come under pressure from his own base, his MAGA base, who are going to say, hang on a minute, we voted you into office on the basis that you were not going to get the United States dragged into any more forever wars in the Middle East. And yet that is every week that goes by, we're now in the third week, every week that goes by, it looks more and more like that is risking happening. So sooner or later, they're going to have to pull the plug on this. And yet that doesn't sit well with the dispatch from the Sea of Japan of this so-called ARG, this amphibious ready group, which has been led by the USS Tripoli with over 2,000 US Marines on it. That is prompting speculation that Donald Trump is possibly considering invading and landing on Kharg Island and trying to seize and hold it. My God, if that happens, there's going to be a lot of casualties, but what are you going to do? You're then going to set up an occupation force on it, and suddenly you're into Iraq, and, into a kind of Iraq-style occupation. And, I think there is a parallel here, Laura, with the Blair years, where there were some very quick, successful operations. Sierra Leone, Kosovo, they worked. And then came Afghanistan, and then came Iraq. And the UK, along with the US, got bogged down in years of occupation and insurgency. And there is that risk for the United States. If he decides to turn this into a ground war, it could be very bad. There's no question the US is hitting a lot of targets, but you can't measure this conflict in terms of targets hit. You measure it in terms of the survivability of the Iranian regime. And it only has to survive to say, we've won. You threw everything you had at us, you gave it your best shot, and you know what? We're still here. The Islamic Republic's still here. So unless there's a mass uprising on the streets that does overthrow the Islamic Republic regime, then the US, frankly, will lose this.
And one thing that's also happened, we're recording at 4:30 on Saturday afternoon, but one thing that's also happened today, Donald Trump has urged the UK and other countries to send ships to help protect the Strait of Hormuz, that vital waterway. You spoke to the Foreign Secretary yesterday, Frank. In my experience of speaking to UK politicians, I cannot imagine that request is going to be fulfilled or something that is a tempting option for the UK government. But what do you think the UK would be likely to say to that request?
Probably that we don't have any